My stepmother tried hijacking my wedding plans, but my real mom showed up, exposed her lies, and what happened next left everyone speechless. Let me set the scene. My name is Carter, and in 6 months, I'm supposed to marry the love of my life, Harper. She's everything I could ever hope for, smart, driven, funny, and honestly way out of my league. We met in college and clicked immediately. Reaching this point feels like the culmination of a story that was always meant to be. But of course, life is a way of complicating things. Enter Vanessa, my stepmother. Vanessa married my dad, Robert, when I was 14, 3 years after my mom, Claire, left us. Or at least, that's what I'd always been told. I hadn't seen or heard from my mother since then, and Vanessa took her place as the new maternal figure. At first, she seemed warm and welcoming, but that didn't last. Over time, her controlling tendencies surfaced. Everything in the house had to be done her way, from meals to holiday plans. Dad, bless him, seemed completely oblivious, always rushing to defend her whenever I brought up her overstepping. Fast forward to now. Harper and I had been engaged for a few months. The planning had started to come together beautifully, largely thanks to Harper's clear vision and her maid of honor, Avery. Harper wanted a small outdoor wedding at a gorgeous garden venue she and Avery had found. It was picturesque, elegant, and simple, everything she wanted. We were working with a planner, Savannah, to bring it all to life. It should have been easy, but then Vanessa decided to get involved. It began with her offering to help streamline the guest list. Harper and I had capped it at around 100 people, close friends and family only. Vanessa, however, insisted on adding more, specifically my dad's business associates and their families. To her, it wasn't just about the wedding, it was about appearances, a reflection of the family, she said, tapping her perfectly manicured nails on the dining table. We can't leave out people who matter to Robert's career. I told her I'd think about it, not wanting to rock the boat, but Harper saw through it immediately. She pointed out what I already knew. This was our wedding, not a networking event. Things escalated from there. Vanessa began showing up uninvited to our planning meetings with Savannah. She didn't come empty-handed either. She brought a full binder of ideas. Page after page of centerpieces, over-the-top venues, and even a dress she thought Harper should wear. It was a stunning dress, sure, but not remotely Harper's style. Harper stayed polite, firm in her resolve, but I could see how much it irked her. Vanessa wouldn't take no for an answer. Her favorite mantra, which I came to dread, was that class is eternal. Savannah, caught in the crossfire, looked like she wished the ground would swallow her whole. The final straw came during a family dinner. Harper and I had already put down a deposit for the garden venue, but Vanessa decided to weigh in anyway. She brought up her friend who could get us a deal on a hotel ballroom. It was, in her words, more elegant than the rustic garden we had chosen. She addressed Harper directly, disguising her interference as helpful advice. As expected, my dad backed her up, insisting we consider the idea because Vanessa knows what she's talking about. I felt cornered, torn between keeping the peace and defending the wedding Harper and I wanted. Later that night, Harper and I had our first real argument about the wedding. Harper, frustrated and pacing the living room, told me in no uncertain terms that Vanessa's influence had to stop. She wasn't wrong. This was supposed to be our day, but Vanessa was hijacking it at every turn. Harper made a point I couldn't ignore. I was marrying her, not Vanessa. Yet standing up to Vanessa felt impossible. For years, she'd made me feel like a kid who couldn't make a single decision without her approval. Then things took a stranger turn. My younger sister Zoe came to me, nervous and hesitant, like she was sharing a secret. She had overheard Vanessa on the phone. Vanessa's voice had been low, but Zoe picked up enough to hear her say something about keeping everything under control before it all falls apart. The words hit me like a gut punch. Zoe admitted she didn't know what it meant, but she'd sounded scared, almost panicked, a side of Vanessa I'd never seen before. At first, I thought Zoe must have misheard. Vanessa was controlling, yes, but nervous? Scared? That didn't fit. She thrived on being in control, on having everyone else play by her rules. Yet the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. What could Vanessa possibly be hiding, and why would it have anything to do with my wedding? That week, Harper and I met up with Mason, my best friend since high school. Mason had always been the guy who could cut through the noise and tell me what I needed to hear. We filled him in on everything. Vanessa's overstepping, her suspicious phone call, the way she seemed to be losing her grip. Mason, unimpressed as ever, dismissed her behavior as typical until I mentioned the phone call. He paused, his expression shifting to something more serious. He pointed out something I hadn't considered. Maybe Vanessa wasn't just trying to control the wedding. Maybe she was panicking because she was losing her grip entirely. Harper agreed, suggesting that people like Vanessa unravel when their control slips. It was a solid theory, but it didn't make me feel any better. Mason's advice was simple. Talk to my dad. If anyone knew what Vanessa was hiding, it was him. I hated the idea of confronting my father, but Mason was right. If I didn't deal with this head-on, it would only get worse. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Dad invited me over the next evening to help with some house repairs. Vanessa wasn't around, which felt like a miracle in itself. As we worked on fixing a squeaky cabinet door in the kitchen, I decided to bring it up. I treaded carefully, testing the waters by mentioning how intense Vanessa had been about the wedding. Dad, predictably, brushed it off as her trying to make the day special for me. I pushed further, mentioning the phone call Zoe overheard. I watched as confusion crossed his face, mingled with something else, something he tried to hide. The conversation wasn't over yet, but I had a sinking feeling I was about to uncover something far more complicated than a meddling stepmother. The knot in my stomach tightened, and for the first time, I wondered if Vanessa's need for control wasn't just about the wedding, but something far, far bigger. Dad's hesitation when I asked about Vanessa set off alarm bells. He dismissed it, saying she was just under a lot of stress and wanted everything to go smoothly. When I pressed him, asking if there was something bigger going on, he sighed and set down the screwdriver. He described Vanessa as a perfectionist, someone who liked things a certain way, but his tone lacked conviction. I could tell he was hiding something, whether consciously or not, and I wasn't going to let it drop. The next day, Harper and I met Savannah to finalize details for the ceremony, but we were met with an unpleasant surprise. Vanessa was already there. She was sitting at the table with Savannah, flipping through a stack of floral arrangements as though she belonged. Harper tensed beside me, and I felt my own frustration bubble up as Vanessa explained she'd come to get a head start and ensure everything was on track. She acted as if her interference was a favor, but her breezy attitude did nothing to mask her overreach. Harper shot me a look that screamed for action, and I stepped in, trying to stay calm. I reminded Vanessa that we had things under control, but she waved me off, dismissing us as if our choices were insignificant. Harper's frustration boiled over as Vanessa insisted on her great suggestions for the centerpieces, something we'd already decided on. Harper firmly shut her down, her tone polite but ice-cold, yet Vanessa refused to let it go. The air in the room was thick with tension, and even Savannah looked like she wanted to disappear. When Vanessa finally left, I knew the damage was done. Harper turned to me, furious and exhausted, insisting that something had to change. I agreed, but for the first time, I realized I wasn't dealing with simple overstepping anymore. Vanessa was bulldozing us, and if I didn't act soon, we'd lose control of our own wedding. That night, Zoe came to me with another piece of the puzzle, and it stopped me cold. She told me she'd overheard Vanessa again on the phone, this time saying they couldn't let Claire ruin everything. The name hit me like a punch. Claire, my mother. My biological mom hadn't been invited to the wedding because Vanessa made sure of it. Vanessa had always painted Claire as the villain, the woman who abandoned her family without a second thought. I'd never questioned that version of the story before, but hearing Zoe's revelation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I told Zoe I needed to find Claire, a decision that surprised even me. I didn't know where to start or if Claire would even want to hear from me, but I felt like the truth had been buried for too long. Vanessa's behavior was spiraling, and I had a sinking suspicion that Claire held answers I didn't even know I needed. With Mason's help, I began the search for my mom. It wasn't easy. Claire had moved out of state years ago, and finding her took persistence and a little luck. Finally, I got a number, and with shaking hands, I called. The voice on the other end made my throat tighten. Claire sounded hopeful, though hesitant, as she said my name. I didn't know how to start the conversation, so I blurted out the truth. I was getting married, and I realized there was so much I didn't know about what had happened between her and Dad. Claire's voice trembled as she admitted she'd always wanted to explain, but had been shut out by Vanessa. She asked to meet in person, saying there was too much to say over the phone. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop halfway between her town and mine. When I walked in, I recognized Claire immediately. She looked older, her blonde hair streaked with silver, but her smile was the same. I sat across from her, overwhelmed by a storm of emotions. Relief, confusion, anger, but I pushed it all aside. Claire broke the silence first. She told me she'd never stopped thinking about me, that she had sent letters, birthday cards, and gifts that I never received. Her voice shook as she explained how Vanessa had cut her out. Vanessa had threatened to make sure my dad fought for full custody if Claire tried to contact me, claiming Claire was unstable. She'd been manipulated out of my life, and the truth shattered everything I thought I knew. Claire's words painted Vanessa in a light I'd never considered. Vanessa had lied. She'd taken my mother from me, carefully crafting her role as the savior who stepped in when Claire abandoned us. All those years I'd resented Claire were based on a lie. Claire didn't know why Vanessa had done it, but she suspected it was about control, over me, over Dad, over everything. It fit. Hearing it made Vanessa's behavior toward the wedding suddenly make sense. This was more than just interference. It was a pattern. Without thinking, I told Claire I wanted her at the wedding. The words felt right, and Claire's stunned expression broke into tears. She asked if I was sure, knowing Vanessa wouldn't be happy about it. I didn't care. Claire was my mom, and she deserved to be there. The next day, I told Harper everything. She was shocked but unwavering in her support. She admitted she'd always had a bad feeling about Vanessa, but hearing the full extent of her manipulation left her floored. Harper was ready to stand by me, no matter the fallout. Vanessa wouldn't take this well, but we agreed on one thing. We weren't going to let her control our lives anymore. Claire was coming to the wedding, and Vanessa would just have to deal with it. Harper's words echoed in my mind, sharp and resolute. If Vanessa couldn't handle the truth, that was her problem, not ours. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. I was taking back control of my life, of my wedding, and of my relationships. But I should have known Vanessa wouldn't let that happen without a fight. Claire's arrival at the pre-wedding family dinner was nothing short of explosive. Vanessa froze the moment she saw my mother walk through the door. For a split second, there was genuine terror in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with her signature scowl. Her voice cut through the room like a knife as she demanded to know what Claire was doing there. I didn't hesitate. I stepped between them and told her the truth. I invited Claire because she had every right to be there, because she was my mother. Vanessa's mask cracked, her face reddening with fury as she snapped back, accusing Claire of abandoning me. Her words dripped with venom, the same lies I'd believed for years. I didn't let her finish. I cut her off, my voice rising as I told her the truth. She had pushed Claire out. Vanessa had lied, manipulated, and painted my mother as a villain while ensuring I never knew the full story. I told everyone in that room what Claire had told me, about the letters, the gifts, and Vanessa's threats. The silence that followed was suffocating. My dad stood off to the side, looking like someone had hit him with a 2x4. He blinked, trying to process everything I'd just said, before finally asking Vanessa if it was true. Vanessa opened her mouth, but for once, no words came out. Claire stepped forward then, her voice steady as she spoke directly to my dad. She explained how Vanessa had made it impossible for her to stay in my life, how every attempt to reach me was met with threats and manipulation. Claire's words were calm but powerful, and for the first time, Vanessa had no defense. Finally, Vanessa erupted, accusing Claire of ruining everything. The wedding, the family, the perfect life she had built. But I didn't let her shift the blame. I told her plainly that she was the one who had been ruining everything, not Claire. Vanessa left in a huff, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. The rest of us sat in stunned silence. My dad looked broken, his hands gripping the edge of the table like he was afraid the world might tip over. He muttered that he didn't know what to say, torn between the weight of Claire's revelations and the years he'd spent under Vanessa's influence. Claire spoke softly, saying she understood how hard it was to process. I could see it in my dad's face. He wasn't a bad man, just a blind one. Harper squeezed my hand under the table, her silent support anchoring me. She gave me a small, determined smile that reassured me I wasn't alone. For all the chaos Vanessa had caused, one thing was finally clear. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The next day, I decided to confront Vanessa one-on-one. I found her pacing in the backyard, her movements frantic and erratic. She didn't even look at me as I approached. When I told her we needed to talk, she whirled around, her face a storm of fury and defiance. She accused me of choosing sides, of betraying her, but I didn't let her bait me. I laid out the facts, telling her I knew about the letters, the lies, and everything she'd done to erase my mother from my life. For once, Vanessa faltered. I saw doubt flicker across her face, a momentary crack in her armor. But she recovered quickly, insisting Claire was manipulating me, that she was jealous of the life Vanessa had built with my father. Her words sounded desperate, hollow, like a last-ditch effort to hold on to control. I didn't let her finish. I told her she had destroyed our family the moment she started lying and manipulating, and I wasn't going to let her ruin my wedding too. Vanessa stared at me, speechless. For a woman who always seemed to have the perfect response, she suddenly had nothing left to say. Without another word, she turned and stormed back into the house, slamming the door behind her. Watching her retreat, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: satisfaction. It wasn't over, but at least I'd finally stood my ground. That afternoon, Harper and I met with Mason and Avery to finalize last-minute wedding details. For the first time in weeks, it felt like we were making real progress. Harper asked if I thought Vanessa might try to pull something on the wedding day. I admitted it was a possibility, but promised her I was ready this time. Mason, ever the protector, confidently offered to throw her out if she tried anything. Avery, usually the cheerful one, looked more serious than I'd ever seen her and voiced the same concern. Vanessa's stubbornness wouldn't let her back down completely, and none of us were naive enough to think this was the end of it. That hope unraveled the very next morning when Harper called me in tears. Vanessa had contacted the florist and tried to change the flower order, swapping out the dahlias Harper had carefully chosen for white roses. Savannah had called Harper to double-check, which was the only reason we caught it in time. Rage boiled in me as I grabbed my keys. Vanessa couldn't stop herself. Even after everything that had happened, she was still trying to claw her way back into control. I drove straight to my dad's house, barely able to see straight. Vanessa's meddling had gone too far, and this time, I was going to end it once and for all. Vanessa sighed dramatically, setting down her magazine with a loud flourish. Her expression dripped with exasperation as she accused me of causing drama. But I wasn't about to let her play the victim. I confronted her about the florist, about her relentless meddling, and about her inability to respect our boundaries. She dismissed me with an icy look, claiming she was just trying to help, as though her interference was something we'd someday appreciate. I didn't hold back. This was our wedding, not hers, and if she couldn't respect that, maybe she shouldn't be there at all. Her face twisted into a scowl, and she shot back a challenge, but I didn't budge. I was done being manipulated. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she muttered a bitter fine, but I didn't trust her for a second. That night, I called Claire to check in. Her calm voice was a much-needed anchor after the day's chaos. I admitted how exhausted I was, that I felt like I was constantly fighting fires. Claire reassured me that I was stronger than I thought, that this was our day, and Vanessa didn't have the power to take it from us. Her words gave me the strength I needed to keep moving forward, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was still ahead. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, but a knot of dread sat heavy in my stomach. I knew Vanessa wouldn't let the day go smoothly. She was too proud, too determined to have things her way. But I refused to let her ruin this for Harper or for me. Mason picked me up early to head to the venue, his usual confidence providing a much-needed boost. He assured me that if Vanessa tried anything, he'd be there to handle it. The garden venue looked breathtaking. Harper and Savannah had worked magic, from the delicate floral arch to the soft string lights hanging above the ceremony area. Guests began arriving, and I did my best to greet everyone, forcing myself to focus on the positive. Harper was tucked away in the bridal suite with Avery and her mom, preparing for the moment we'd all been waiting for. The thought of seeing her walk down the aisle was the only thing keeping me grounded. Then Vanessa arrived. She swept into the venue like she was walking onto a stage, wearing a floor-length gown far too elaborate for a stepmother at a wedding. Her presence loomed, an unspoken tension spreading through the air. I kept my distance, but I could feel her watching me, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Claire arrived shortly after, elegant and understated in a pale blue dress. She spotted me and came over, her smile warm and reassuring. She asked if I was holding up, and I told her I would be, as long as Vanessa behaved. Claire met my gaze, her voice steady as she said that if Vanessa didn't, we'd handle it together. The ceremony began without a hitch. As the music started and Harper walked down the aisle, every fear, every frustration melted away. She looked stunning, her dress flowing behind her like something out of a dream. In that moment, it was just the two of us. Every ounce of love, every promise we'd made to each other, was right there in her smile. But the peace didn't last. As the officiant began his speech, I noticed Vanessa shifting in her seat. Her movements were tense, her gaze darting around. Then, as the officiant asked if anyone objected to the marriage, she stood up. Her voice rang out sharp and clear, cutting through the air like a blade. The crowd gasped, and my heart plummeted. Harper's expression turned from joy to hurt, and I felt a surge of anger I could barely contain. I stepped forward, ready to stop her, but Claire beat me to it. Claire stood up, her voice steady and strong as she challenged Vanessa to tell the truth. The room fell silent as Claire laid it all bare. The years of manipulation, the lies Vanessa had spun to tear our family apart, and the control she refused to relinquish. Vanessa tried to protest, claiming she'd done everything for the family, but Claire didn't let her escape. She called Vanessa out for putting herself first, for turning my father against her, and for trying to sabotage my wedding. Vanessa's defenses crumbled under the weight of the truth. My dad stood next, his voice unsteady as he asked Vanessa if what Claire said was true. For the first time, Vanessa had no answer. Her face paled, her mask slipping as the room watched her crumble. She muttered weakly that she'd done what she thought was best, that she was trying to protect the family, but the words rang hollow. I didn't hold back. I told her she hadn't protected us. She'd torn us apart. Harper stepped forward then, calm and unwavering, and told Vanessa that if she couldn't support us, she needed to leave. The crowd murmured in quiet agreement, and I saw the defeat in Vanessa's face. She looked to my dad, to me, as if searching for someone to save her, but no one came to her defense. With nothing left to say, she turned and walked out, disappearing down the aisle without another word. The tension broke like a storm finally passing, leaving behind a sense of clarity and relief. The ceremony resumed, and as Harper and I exchanged our vows, the world felt right again. When we kissed, the crowd erupted into cheers, and for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. At the reception, Claire pulled me aside. Her eyes shone with pride as she told me how strong I'd been, how I'd stood up for myself and for Harper when it mattered most. I thanked her, calling her mom for the first time in years. The word felt natural, like it had been waiting all along to be spoken. Harper joined us then, slipping her hand into mine and raising her glass with a smile. She toasted to a fresh start, to family, the one we choose and the one we fight for. Looking at Claire and Harper, I knew she was right. For all the chaos Vanessa had caused, she had failed. She hadn't broken us. She'd only made us stronger. The rest of the night was a blur of laughter, dancing, and pure joy. As Harper and I drove off into the night, ready to start our honeymoon and the next chapter of our lives, I felt nothing but gratitude for the people who stood by us and for the strength it had taken to finally stand up for myself.